So in order to kickstart the conversation, I would like to request Bilal कि वो रोशनी डालें अपनी statistical insights की नज़र में कि कोविड-19 का बिलखसूस पाकिस्तान के मौशी हालात पर क्या असर होगा और आलमी सतह पे जो मौशी लिहाज से तब्दीलियां आ रही हैं वो पाकिस्तान में सरमायाकारी को किस तरह मुतासर करेगी.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to present. We've been tracking the public perception as well as the perception of the businesses throughout the Corona times in Pakistan. And we've also been keeping up a tab of other economic indicators that are coming from Pakistan and elsewhere in the world. So we recently did a business confidence survey with SME businesses, medium-sized businesses, large-scale businesses, and we saw that the business confidence was significantly down during the COVID times, and there was a significant pessimism about how the businesses perceived if there was a post-COVID time scenario. There was a lot of pessimism about it as well. So the business situation net score, as we call it, our business confidence index, it was during the current quarter, before the COVID times, it was already in the negative, but it fell by about 68% and further. So I think one of the situations that we need to keep into mind about Pakistan is that the economy was in significant decline before the corona struck. So because of the demand compression and other measures, the economy was already reeling. And then the COVID lockdown struck. So the business confidence is significantly down. If one looks into the large scale manufacturing, the results released very recently by PBS, the index of large scale manufacturing, it has fell by 35% points in March. That doesn't completely reflect the lockdown and its impact. As you would know, the lockdown only started on the 21st of March in Sindh, and then later on in Punjab. So the first 20 days of March, even though the lockdown was not there, we see that a lot of businesses had already started anticipating how things were not going all right, and the index shows that the contraction happened significantly. So if you look at the distribution of the large scale manufacturing and its contraction in March, we look at about 50% fall in automobile industry, 57% in electronics, 35% in engineering, about 100% in wood products. So if one goes ahead in terms of the worker remittances, there is a significant. I mean, there are different projections that are happening, and the numbers that have been recently released for the month of April, they seem to give some hope. But if you look at the details of the remittances data, out of the top 13 countries, only 2 countries show a positive increase, where the US represents about a 50% increase. So our understanding is that the remittance data for the April may give a little false picture as to what is about to come. But then there are different predictions to this, but most of the predictions would suggest a significant fall. And given the importance of the worker remittances, not just for the local economy, the local investment situation in terms of remittances fueling consumption, but also fueling investment in construction sector, for example. These are very significant numbers, and the World Bank projections for across the world on worker remittances also suggest that the market may be looking for a very sharp decline. This, together with the fall in the oil prices and Pakistani worker remittances, at least 50% coming from the the Middle Eastern market, which is very heavily oil dependent, and a 50% coming from the UK and the US. These the worker remittances, I think, is something that we really need to look for, because that could spell the current account deficit deteriorating in spite of the oil gains that we're looking at. Very recently, Hisab Kitab, which is a very interesting software application, they've released their data, which shows that that there has been a 70% decline in the food industry in Pakistan, about a 21% decline in eating out numbers, and but they also suggest that the decline in the eating out and the restaurant industry is to some extent taken over by the grocery market. So people are essentially switching between one sector to the other. So that's one interesting feature that maybe we can look into later in the conversation. If there are winners of this crisis in Pakistan, and whether the industry and the service sector can essentially adapt itself to bear the losses coming out of it in a more even way. In terms of the public opinion and how the micro economy has been affected, these were all very macro numbers. But if you look at the household level, we recently did a survey, and we see three main findings coming from the micro economy at the household level. There is a significant food insecurity fear. There is financial insecurity fear, and there is now a significant reliance on outside help in Pakistan. So, in terms of the food security, about 6.9 million households in Pakistan, about a quarter of the households, say to us that they have reduced the number or size of meals for some family members. And this is a very devastating figure, because we're talking about not just a quarter of a million households, but several million individuals. And food insecurity has a very uneven impact on the household and its members. We know that the deprived sections of the community, of the household, they are more aggravatedly affected by it. So when there's food insecurity, younger children are affected more, female children are affected more. In terms of the financial insecurity, about 1 in 5 say they had to lean on their savings to cover basic household needs. About 10 million individuals are saying that they are trying to additionally earn money. This is in addition to about 80% reporting that there has been a significant loss of their income. And about 3 million households say that they are now actively dependent on other than government NGO assistance. So I just wanted to put the current picture as it appears to us before we start talking about the future, because the future is dependent on the present, and it provides some context to the conversation and our ability to predict how things would be, and our ability to assist the government through this forum on what can be done.
Thank you, Bilal, for laying out all the essential facts for us, which can help us with our conversation here. And now I would like to steer the conversation to identifying that how all what Bilal has said, which reflects low in business confidence, reduction in consumption overall, reduction in the large scale manufacturing industries growth rate, and challenges such as food insecurity looming over us. So I would like to steer this conversation to Nadine Javed Saab to get his input and to get his insights that how all these factors, when we take into account all these factors, how this will affect the global economy and what potential rearrangements will be required to make. And in Pakistan particularly, how this will then translate into the economic landscape in Pakistan. So, sir, if you can shed your wisdom on this?
Thank you, Ahmed, for the opportunity. And so I think whatsoever has been highlighted by Bilal is when we look at global context, the situation is like, both the global economy and then the domestic economy they are reinforcing this, downturn into each other. And there's a kind of a co-evolution sort of an arrangement that's going on. So the most important aspect are yet to, come, and they have, or they could have even more profound implications for the livelihoods in the days to come. Because if you look at, then normally you have to divide this impact in two steps. The first step is that economic impact of the virus spread. And normally, if you look at, then most of the public health systems, uh, they they imposed lockdowns, travel bans, then comprehensive, you can say that contact tracing, then provision of this, health capacity equipment. All these things were in the first step, and those has caused the immediate effect. But subsequently, there would be another, ripple effect, and that is, you could call it a knock-on effect of these, public health responses, and those are primarily causing the unemployment to increase. Then most of the businesses, which Bilal has also pointed out, particularly restaurants and some food businesses, those are, closely, there is a shutdown. Then then subsequently there would be corporate failures, and then credit defaults, particularly posing a lot more serious challenge for the banking industry and the financial system of the countries. And that would be even much more complicated as compared to what we are discussing at the moment. So this knock-on effect would be, I think, should be, and would be the concern of any government, that how to mitigate its negative repercussions or implications in the days to come. So, one thing is quite clear when we are going to evaluate its impact on the global level. So, this phenomena of globalization, there was to a large extent getting, kind of a momentum or traction in the past. That was derailed by having this, China US trade war that was going on in the global context. And roughly speaking, that 780 billion dollars worth of trade was already jeopardized by having some stringent tariff and non-tariff measures which have been taken in the recent past. I'm not talking about uh, I mean 3-4 quarters. Rather, it was just roughly 2 or 3 weeks before the corona hit China. The situation was like this, and then this pandemic has further deepened this reversal of globalization. And now, if you look at, then the forecast for Europe and America are much more severe as compared to what the kind of downturn they had faced in the face of global financial crisis in 2008. So at that time, the contraction was about 4.5% in Europe, and it was around 5.5% in US market. But now it is being expected that it would be around 7.4% in Europe, and that it would be around 9% in United States of America. So if these two major markets of the world are going to contract by this much percentage, and then more adding fuel to the fire, most of these oil-rich countries, which are also facing the problem because of having this OPEC crisis, and then subsequently corona implications on their oil prices. is further going to complicate the things, because in global financial crisis, the situation was not so grave as it is now, in particularly these oil-rich countries as well. So I mean, together this Europe, US, and then oil-rich countries are going to, once contract, these are going to have severe implications for the countries like us. Particularly, we are exporting very, low value added stuff that is highly price sensitive. And eventually, if there would be a kind of low income levels in these countries, and the similar kind of situation as Bilal has pointed out, the low level of consumer confidence, low spending, low investments. So then eventually the countries like us would be the hard hit countries, because we are the ones who are selling this. I mean, roughly around 19-20 billion dollars worth of our exports are very, low value added products. So first of all, there would be a severe decline in those products, and then subsequently there would be a decline in the remittances. And as per certain forecast by IMF and World Bank, roughly it would be, 15 to 23% decline in the subsequent quarter. And the reason being, this is not being reflected in the April numbers, as Bilal has pointed out, because if you look at then Saudi Arabia, UAE, most of these countries from where our remittances are coming, so they have ensured, for 6 weeks salaries to their staff in advance in previous month. So because of that, there was no such a kind of severe decline in the remittances for the month of April. But now for the month of May, I think there would be certain signs of this decline. And then together, having this decline in exports numbers, and then these remittances are going to create the same situation, the kind of we had on our current account balance. So that's how I would, conclude by, summing up this discussion, that the shadows would be much more severe as compared to the global financial crisis, because that's the kind of an benchmark we have up till now. And the countries like us, Pakistan, we are going to have a severe, implications on our economic growth, and as well as on the livelihoods of particularly those people who are working or who are drawing their livelihoods from the informal sector. And unfortunately, the numbers suggest from the labor force surveys that roughly 70% of our labor force, that's around 36 million people, are drawing their livelihoods from the informal sector. So those should be the serious concern for the government. And once we will be talking about the fifth question, I will talk about that as well.
So I think we can safely assume that this COVID-19 has made us face the biggest economic challenge of our times, and has established that its impact is across all the sectors of economy and will have implications for all segments of the society. So Nahid, I would like to request you to please share some insights that what potential economic rearrangements in our overall economic setup in Pakistan we can try to look into in order to limit the impact of COVID-19 and in order to safeguard the vulnerable segments of our society. So if you can please shed some light on this.
Thank you. So I'll begin from, picking up from where the sub left off, starting with the point on globalization. So yes, it is very valid that this sort of the entire globalization spree has now taken a backseat, and we will be looking at, as we go forward, more localization, more regional business, more internal growth. I see this as a huge opportunity for Pakistan. If I were going to think about what I would do tomorrow, I would raise protectionism. I would say that this is an opportunity that we probably missed out on earlier. I mean, India had this whole license Raj, the whole Nehru era. I mean, we all understand what that was all about. It was all about made in India. It was all about, I remember going there and having thumbs up and coming back to Pakistan and saying, oh, we have Coca-Cola, and driving all these fancy cars here, whereas over there you had the Marutis and the ambassadors and so on. But look what happened then. They actually built themselves. They built the industrial machine. They built their backbone. They built that whole, and based on a domestic growth, not just an export growth. Whereas we did not really get onto the bandwagon. And then slowly what happened to us was that we were no longer competitive. We could not be competitive because, I mean, the only place where we found ourselves to be competitive was a low-cost labor industrial base. And what was that? Textile, for example, and so on. So our entire focus was just on that. On a few industries like that, it were very high labor intensive, and that's where you were going. But we could not really then get on to that. You spoke about large scale manufacturing and how that's fallen. Well, in Pakistan, that never really took off. So that's one. So I see what's happening now as an opportunity for Pakistan to actually build that whole made in Pakistan. Let's build our industry, and let's now, because we would not be able to, obviously with the whole current account deficit, the fiscal deficits are going to be very high, and that whole economic situation, the way it's going to pan out is not just for us, but it's going to be for most countries. So our ability to import, our reserves and so on and so forth is going to put a huge pressure on our economy anyways. So from that economic aspect, plus from an opportunity aspect, I would say that this is a real big opportunity for local industry to be patronized and given a chance. And not just by saying it, you need to have a sectoral focused approach and really attack it. The word is properly attack it. So that's one. And then there was a discussion about debt and how the debt is going to increase and how there'll be defaults and how there'll be corporate defaults. Of course, that'll be the case. The finance sector in this country should finally wake up. If you ask me, they've done nothing for this country. I mean, really, the banking, etc. They've just been commercial sharks. So if you talk about debt restructuring, if you talk about building your equity markets, your capital markets, bringing more money in through there and encouraging these industries to actually develop with public funds, with restructuring these, and so that these industries that we want to encourage can actually take off. So I see a big role for the finance industry in general. I see a big role for the banks to take a lead. I see a big role for monetary policy collectively to actually encourage all this to happen. And then speaking about industries and, what individual sort of sectors or can do, there was a mention of that. And I think someone just mentioned about a switching, from one sector to another, how one can move to the other. And that's exactly what's going to happen. We'll all have to adapt. And I think what's really happened is that we've just been pushed forward 5 years. What is happening now, this whole online, IT, virtual sort of businesses and this growth, we were already moving in that direction. And now we're suddenly there. We're there. Those 10 years just happened in 3 months, the way I look at it. So I think that businesses need to very quickly adapt. They need to be thinking. I mean, I wish I was 30 years old today. That's what I'm thinking. Because then I would think about, and I know young people especially feel very disheartened. They feel, oh God, how are they going to grow? What careers are they going to be now in, and so on. I think this is a great time for them to be where they are, because everything is sort of being reset. Your gurus of the world, your Warren Buffetts of the world are now divesting. They're selling stock. People are moving out because they don't have the stamina now to reset. The young people do. So I see a huge opening up yesterday about a virtual trade show, which I found really interesting. So how you have these big conference rooms and these big exhibition halls, and you have these trade shows and everyone physically going there. Replicate this virtually. And someone was like, this Chinese targeted. It can't just be sort of groping in the dark. You need to have a game plan here about how you encourage your local industry. Employment problem will not be, it won't, I don't see long-term unemployment to be persistent. I don't think so. I think industry will revive, and I think new industries will come up. It's just a case of resetting and how we go about doing it.
Oh, thank you for much needed. But like you said, and like what Bilal said, that there will be some winners and some losers pandemic which we are facing globally. On whatever available opportunities, it needs to be at a place where बात ये दी जाती थी कि हमारे कुछ bottlenecks हैं, जैसे कि infrastructural bottlenecks हैं, energy bottlenecks हैं, और हमने अभी recent past में देखा कि पाकिस्तान ने बिलखसूस बैरूनी सरमायादारी को हासिल करने के लिए कोशिशें की, जिसके नतीजे में चीन पाकिस्तान इक्तिसादी राहदारी जैसे मंसूबे हमें देखने में नजर आए, जो कि फोकस करते थे इन बॉटलनेक्स को ओवरकम करने में, ताकि पाकिस्तान एक्चुअलाइज कर सके अपनी ट्रू इकोनॉमिक पोटेंशियल। तो मेरा अगला सवाल हसन खावर साहब और हसन दाऊद साहब से दोनों से होएगा, क्योंकि वो इसमें एक्सपर्टीज रखते हैं, इसमें महारत रखते हैं, उन्होंने इस पे काम किया है बहुत ज्यादा, कि बिलखसूस पाकिस्तान में बैरूनी सरमायादारी के लिहाज से चीन सर फहरिस्त हमें नजर आता है, और उसके नतीजे में ये जो अभी बातें हो रही थी कि जो बॉटलनेक्स हैं वो भी हमें टूटते हुए नजर आ रहे थे इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चरल प्रोजेक्ट्स के नतीजे में, स्पेशल इकोनॉमिक जोन्स की डेवलपमेंट के नतीजे में। तो अच्छे से समझते हैं कि कोविड की वजह से एक तो ओवरऑल एट एन ओवरऑल लेवल आप क्या समझते हैं कि फॉरेन डायरेक्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट किस हद तक मुतासर होगी पाकिस्तान में, और चीन की जो सरमायादारी है पाकिस्तान के अंदर बिलखसूस इन मंसूबों से जो जुड़ी हुई है, क्या आप उसको भी देखते हैं, नजर उसको भी असरअंदाज होता हुआ देखते हैं, या उसके क्या असरात आप देखते हैं? तो इस पे आपसे गुजारिश है, if I can start with Hassan Daud Saab and then Hassan Khawer can add to it. So this is very interesting, and this will help a lot to understand what effect to what an effect Pakistan's economy will be hit.
The other positive that I see, Ahmed, I can hear Salis Urdu coming out of you. So this is a positive impact, of COVID-19. Besides this, I think Charles Dickens would be very happy in its, reminding us all of his tales of two cities, from light to darkness and from euphoria to disgrace. I think we're living in interesting times. Things are changing fast, some positive, some negative. Before actually COVID-19 hit us in March, say about 23rd of March, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, we were actually working on redefining our structure and also looking at new possibilities of attracting FDI. Because we were in our huddles, we were quite clear that there would be relocation happening because of the US-China trade war, and now with COVID and the kind of risk that it has highlighted, I think further relocation would take place. So this is one point that we are revising our industrial policy, giving more incentives to people to invest in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, especially in newly merged district, because we have this huge land mass which is available. Cost of land is steep. Human resources, hardworking. But having said that, for us at this point, Rashakai remains a key, deliverable, where we want to get over with the bureaucratic channel as soon as possible and go ahead with the groundbreaking. As per my personal impression and the discussions that I have had with Chinese in the last, say, 4 weeks, even during COVID, there was a lot of attention from the Chinese side in terms of queries that I was getting in KP Board of Investment. Likewise, some Chinese steel manufacturers have already moved to Rashakai. They bought land. Pakistani manufacturers are looking at Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Hatar, Rashakai in terms of their investment. But while our businesses and our classroom move to living room, there would be, profound changes. I also see, because the government was working on its e-commerce policy, and a lot of work, I think some progress and fast progress would happen that way in terms of redefining our roles, and also the structure, making it easier for especially women entrepreneurs to come, female entrepreneurs to come and participate. Lot of, because I was engaged in my connection for private sector to support the government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in combating COVID-19. So a lot of female entrepreneurs approach us in health sector, and wanted us to guide them through this process. Some young doctors actually approach us in telemedicine. So there's a lot of hope for Khyber Pakhtunkhwa specifically, and for Pakistan, perhaps in pharmaceutical sector, also in agriculture, because we were already in the process of improving our agriculture sector, which is per unit yield by far the lowest in the region, and the kind of natural endowment we have, and we were working on leveraging it. We also see tourism jumping back quickly, because most of our consumers in that sector were domestic. We do not see China time, but we do see as soon as this COVID lockdowns are over, a lot of people would come and attract the tourism sector, where we are offering a lot of incentives again. In terms of tourists for Pakistan and investment by Chinese, there is, I think the Chinese tourists would relocate to countries close to them, like Cambodia, like Malaysia, even to Pakistan, if we offer them the kind of services that other countries offer. And similarly, we need to actually work on, and there's a debate going on. We were in Board of Investment just last week and talking about our incentive package. We need to revise our incentive package based on what is happening across the globe, and structure it well based on our competitors. If we do that at KP, we are willing to do that at provincial level, but naturally it has to go through the Board of Investment. So I think if we do that, we will be able to attract investment coming to Pakistan, and there is hope there. But having said that, I think we need to improve our governance. We need to improve, especially e-governance should come in now. The other positive that I look, and I've been speaking about, is that we might enter the fourth industrial revolution faster than we want to, or we wanted to, because now the digital world would expand, and with perhaps we will enter 5G earlier, because China is now willing to support Pakistan in way. We also, lastly, because I would let Hassan Daud, because he writes a lot about on BRI. I think based on the discussion that we had with the CPEC authority and their discussion with the Chinese are willing to support us in agriculture, also in e-commerce, and perhaps in the infrastructure. We need to prioritize, as we did earlier, on the early harvest and perhaps short-term goals that we want to accrue from, and move forward in our put our bags full of ideas and just go to China each time and then come back with a sorry figure. We need to actually prioritize our requirement and then approach China the way the Chinese for financing sector. They need to be jolted, and from their commercial aspect, I think they need to finance, where provinces like Khyber is suffering a lot. So we are talking with our Bank of Khyber. Unfortunately, the first department to hit by COVID was our Bank of Khyber. Their MD was diagnosed with COVID-19, so the bank operations were halted for a little while. But now we're back into game. The government is working closely. I am happy to report that the current government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is quite pragmatic.
Thank you. Hassan, if you want to add, particularly in the context of SEZs and how BRI's chunk for
थोड़ी सी इसमें कुछ 4-5 बातें पहले करना चाहता हूँ कि हमें कुछ चीज़ों को we have to take stock of a few developments that are happening. And even before I say that, I think whatever we are talking about, of course, have a huge shadow of uncertainty looming over it, because we don't know what's post-COVID world would look like, whether there is going to be a post-COVID world or whether we'll have to live with COVID for a long duration of time. And even in Pakistan, lockdown is easing up, but we have seen the number of cases growing very, very rapidly. Although luckily the death rate is not as high as we have seen in some of the OECD countries. So I think there are positives and negatives. So whatever we say is bound to change as the situation evolves. But I think nevertheless, there are a few things that we need to be aware of. The first is that after, and if we talk in the larger context of Belt and Road Initiative, and of course Pakistan is a part of it. So I think going forward, countries would be needing more financing, and they would be much more open to accessing any source of finance, because for multilateral financing, there is going to be a huge competition. So if Chinese have the money to offer, first, there are going to be many takers for that. Whether they'd have it or not, I think that's another question. The second is that while countries would be very much open to get new money, they'd be hard pressed to pay back the older loans. Because even if there were any public-private partnership projects, the revenues are going to fall. The country's capacity to pay back debt is going to shrink substantially. And you know that Pakistan has already asked G20 and others to kind of restructure its debt. And I think it's the same for many other developing countries. So the investments that have already been made, I think they are likely to suffer from disruptions in cash outflows and repayments. So I think that's second. The third is that when you come to Pakistan especially, I think there is an ongoing conversation on IPPs and capacity payments. And I think that is quite central to how Pak-China policy on CPEC is going to move forward. Because the news is coming out that Pakistan has already requested China to reduce the interest rate on the existing energy projects. And it has also requested China to change the structure to kind of extend the debt repayment terms on those projects from 10 years to 20 years. I'm not sure what China's response is going to be. Probably they'd agree to some because they know that Pakistan is in a tough spot. But I think the IPP conversation, it has to be managed well, not to one of the largest sponsors in the world. So I think that's third. The fourth is, and I think Nadeem Saab and Hassan Saab and others have also kind of alluded to that, that the world as we know it is changing, and the market structure and the trade structure is going to change. And I do believe that for China, MENA region, Middle East, North Africa, will resume greater importance as import markets in US and Europe are going to shrink. And as soon as China's interest in MENA increases further, I think Pakistan's importance, both due to connectivity and its geostrategic location, the weather and everything, it's going to increase. So I think Pakistan is not going to lose its importance there. The next thing is, and again, I'm just kind of summarizing because many of our panelists have talked about it, are the opportunity sectors. And there are sectors that are going to gain, which need to inform government policy. So we do know that IT and many of its sub-segments are going to be the beneficiaries. Agriculture sector is likely to suffer less because mostly of inelastic demand. Logistics, I think, would assume greater importance. And even health-related sectors, I think, are going to be very important. You also talked about FDI. And I think we must realize that the competition to get FDI would be cutthroat going forward. Each and every country would be racing to offer incentives for any possible sources of FDI. And I think even when you look at Pakistan, I think we are going to face domestic competition. As provinces are going to face the need of investment, we would see KP, Punjab, Sindh, and even Balochistan kind of mobilizing their efforts to offer incentives to incoming investors, because the investors would be fewer and the needs would be greater. So I think that competition is going to be there. And lastly, I think the government's ability to intervene through a fiscal stimulus, through infrastructure investments, through public investments, is going to be far smaller. And if you would refer to the ongoing conversation on the 10th NFC award, on 18th Amendment, we can very clearly see that the resources are shrinking and tensions are rising. And I think the issue is going to be very, very contentious. So if we believe that federal government or even any provincial government would be able to spend significant amounts of money in infrastructure or to mobilize investments or maybe special economic zones hugely, I think that's going to be a little bit more difficult. Now, what it means for us is, in terms of a policy response, that as government's ability to put in a fiscal stimulus or to put in hard cash is going to be limited, they are going to be reliant more and more on policy reforms, on softer reforms, on interventions that do not need money. I think they would be of paramount importance. So when we talk about special economic zones, because special economic zones are not as investment intensive as, let's suppose, a railway project or something else. So I think that's not going to be a problem. But I think more than the infrastructure investments, uh, the regulatory reform is going to be important, because uh, in an environment where there is a huge competition for FDI, I think the tolerance in the investors to bear with the red tape is going to be much less. And if any province that can succeed or that is going to do a good job in improving its regulatory environment within its SEZ is probably going to be a winner, at least in relative terms compared to the other provinces. So I think SEZs and software reforms are the keywords. The other one is that government would need to get out of the traditional public investment paradigm. And I think it would really need to now rely on private sector investment, both purely private investments as well as private investment infrastructure, which means public-private partnerships. And that is something that we have talked about a lot in the past. I think Pakistan also uh, has had a track record of PPPs, but only in a few sectors like energy. I think that would need to kind of go out of that energy sector, and Pakistan and the provinces are going to need private investments in infrastructure services and in a number of other areas. And I think something that Hassan Daud Saab said, I think that was very interesting, that the tourism in KP is likely to pick up because there are not going to be international tourists, there are going to be more domestic tourists. I think that is the key, that going forward, we need to have a domestic focus as well. As the world is kind of going through a metamorphism and the sources of financing are going to dry up, I think we need to have a domestically focused strategy. When we talk about investments, we need to mobilize domestic investors as well, because that is going to be a saving grace for Pakistan. And I think lastly, I would refer to what Nahid said about restructuring the industrial landscape of Pakistan and of different provinces. And I think we all talk about the opportunity sectors, and I just refer to them like IT and agriculture and logistics and others. But I think the real question to ask is that are these new opportunities informing our policy response? When we talk about SEZs, are we looking at these opportunity sectors? When we look at industrial policy, are we looking at these sectors? And I think at some places we might be. So for example, when we are planning for a special economic zones, it might be easier to talk about the opportunity sectors. But when we talk about the political economy of our industrial policy, when we decide how to treat the 5 export sectors, how to kind of treat the subsidies going to the large industrialists, how to treat the sugar industry, the textile people, the cement cartel. I think those are the real contentious issues, because whether we like it or not, going forward, Pakistan, and for that matter, many other countries would not have much money to spare. So I think we must realize that the party that has been going on for the last 70 years is over. And the sooner we realize it, I think the better we'd be. Thank you.
So from what I can gather, thank you, Hassan, for so comprehensively contextualizing the challenges for Pakistan, challenges due to COVID. So from what I gather, we have discussed at length the uh, pull factors in Pakistan, the economic factors in Pakistan, and I think we can conclude that their uh, relevance is very Pakistan specific. For example, its strategic importance, its labor force, and all those factors. But then there are some other factors as well, which has a large bearing on our economy, such as the remittances inflow. And we know from the reports and from the statistics and from the global economic conditions that they will take a major hit. So in the light of whatever has been said here today, I would like to come back to all of you to understand. Hassan has already provided us with certain policy responses that the government should look into, and the private sector should also look into. But I would like to come back to all of you that in the light of the discussion we have had, what way forward do you envision, and what policy recommendations you can give here today, which we can present to the government and can also share in the civil society, academia, and policy specialists at large, so that we can collectively initiate this course at this level, which can help Pakistan benefit from the potential opportunities and can help limit the impact, the socio-economic impact. So I would like to go back to all of you, starting from Nadine Javed. Very shortly, if you can shed light on what way forward do you envision for Pakistan, for the economic responses and other responses.
On this question, once again, we need to look at the kind of time spectrum which the research or some experts are highlighting. And roughly the timeline is around 14 to 18 months that we are going to continue to face this problem of corona until some vaccine or other cure is available. So keeping in view this time in mind, first of all, I think government needs to set certain protocols, particularly to induce some behavioral change among the citizens. Otherwise, it would not be possible to manage it, because you can't have lockdowns for prolonged time periods. Even if you are going to open them, then there would be no. Let's see what happens. But generally speaking, there could be much more pressure onto the hospitals and your health system, and as you know that we are not up to that level, even if the America, Italy, and Spain could not handle. So for us, it would be even much more complicated. So keeping in view that aspect, I think the first focus should be to inculcate certain behavioral changes which are required to deal with it. And that would not be possible. And unfortunately, up till now, I've already written an article about it that that was published in Business Recorder, that there is no unified response, provincial and the federal government. This kind of this political gimmickry that's going on around this issue is further complicating the issue, because on one side this is very serious issue, but on the other side people are taking it very lightly, and because perhaps they think that it is kind of some politics that's going on between the provinces and the federal government. Then the second aspect is that once you are doing this, along with it, you need to have a very concrete employment policy, in which you are not going to give this cash transfer every quarter. That would not be possible, as Hassan has very appropriately highlighted the kind of fiscal space government has. We cannot afford to have, very generous, cash transfers in near future. But on the other side, keeping in view that there would not be, large scale manufacturing and activity in the country, there would not be, other, economic options, particularly for earning the livelihoods. So then it is government who will have to create some livelihood, particularly by initiating some, mega projects, but labor intensive mega projects. And might be if even you have to stop certain, public sector investments, public PSDP investments, you have to stop for a while. You must stop them and create certain, like 100 days employment program for the rural, youth. That could be, with the help of this, you can create some, you know that most of our water infrastructure is downtrodden at the moment. Since 30, 40 years, no massive investment has been made in your canal system and your, rural roads, rural infrastructure is, in a dilapidated state, and the government can come up with some, investment in those sectors on a, quick fix basis, so that you are going to create 100 to 150 days job guaranteed jobs for the youth, uh, and that's not, very for a very kind of a skilled labor force.
Mm.
Once you are going to do that, it is going to add some, breathing space for those who are not, in getting their livelihoods from the existing situation that's going on at the moment. Then, besides this, there could be a third strategy that government should seriously consider, and that's reskilling the youth and certain, even you could consider beyond youth, those who are in the age bracket of, 40, 45, and they are now supposed to lose their jobs in from the existing livelihood opportunities. How to, reskill them and then going to make them, again, a kind of a viable workforce for getting their livelihoods from the future. Those industries which are now going to be highlighted, like particularly e-commerce, as Hassan Daud has already highlighted that certain policy was almost, when we were working for the government, that policy was almost in the final phase. Certain retweaks were required, but I don't know why this government is taking so much time in finalizing that. Besides this, as Hassan has also highlighted, that only, incentive are not going to work, particularly to attract the foreign direct investment. There would be cutthroat competition. I strongly agree with Hassan on that aspect. So once there would be cutthroat competition, so what is needed beyond these incentives which we are offering, since last 4 or 5 years, but yet there is no progress, particularly on, increasing the foreign direct investment in Pakistan. And that is, I strongly feel that this is what is the policy framework of Pakistan. Until and unless you are going to have a very coherent and stable policy framework, it is less likely that any foreign direct investor is simply going to respond to these incentives, particularly these fiscal incentives which we are offering. This is not, these are not going to do any miracle until and unless we are not going to have a very robust policy framework. And as I have written in Dawn, that article was published, that we are at the moment we have 26 different federal level policies which are decade old, most of them, and recently few of them have been revamped or reshaped in last 4 or 5 years. And apart from that, most of them are decade old. Eventually, though, those have lost their relevance, and particularly those have lost their relevance in now, this context which we are facing now. And two things are very I mean, clear in this context. And one, thanks to Nahid, she has already highlighted that it is now an era or where once again you have to look at indigenous sources of growth, because neither you can earn with the help of exports, nor you will be able to, I mean, simply export your labor force to the MENA region or to, I mean, other developed worlds, and they are going to give some resilience to your economic system. These two possibilities are, I feel, are, I mean, now over. And only it would be possible that if you are going to have highly skilled labor force that could, I mean, help in digitization of the MENA region and some other, I mean, developing countries like us, they could be able to get absorbed in the global workforce. And beside this, now you have to rely heavily on your domestic, I mean, production system, domestic production methodologies and strategies. Only then it would be possible that we are going to have certain kind of breathing space.
Yes.
So, I mean, with these 4 or 5 different aspects, if the government is going to focus on these aspects, only then it would be possible that we can overcome slightly some of the pitfalls and some negative repercussions. Those are over there, and as well as some of the positive repercussions, those are over there, particularly having this, I mean, digitization, Internet of Things, and this, I mean, 4G, or I mean, this fourth industrial revolution, that would be now much more expedited because of this COVID, I mean, kind of context. Thanks to COVID, you could say that that is the only, I mean, silver lining that is there in this crisis, I feel. And only those countries which are going to respond to this appropriately would be the winners in the next phase. Otherwise, I think the situation would be much more worse for the countries like us. Thank you.
Sure, sure. Thank you. So very quickly, we're short on time, and other participants have engagements elsewhere as well. So very quickly, Nahid, Saiba, if you can also comment on the way forward, and so that then I can go back to other participants as well.
Yeah, sure. I will summarize this very quickly because I think we've almost got to the bottom line. One thing I want to point out here is that unlike the 2008-2009 financial crisis, which then saw the world looking at austerity and experimenting with austerity, अब ये नहीं हो सकता. वो इसलिए नहीं हो सकता क्योंकि now governments will be compelled to spend more and not less. Now, because they have to do much more. Now, the one key thing that I would say that we perhaps have missed out is we're talking about FDI, we're talking about remaining, you know, a player in the game, trying to bring in, whether it's investment, trying to do business, trying to maintain some level of remittances coming in and so on. आप कुछ भी देखें, the winner will be the country which has a solid public health system. And my fear is that if we do not have a cohesive, a very, very solid public health strategy, we will stand nowhere in the world which is staring at us in our face. We will not be able to do it. Meaning I will not be able to travel, you will not be able to travel if you come from a country which is absolutely nowhere when it comes to combating this disease and any other disease which is, you know, probably around the corner for us. So now this is a no-brainer. Public health has to be the first investment game for us. If Pakistan has to remain competitive, if Pakistan has to even earn a living for its workers or whatever that we need to do. So सारी investment आपने इस तरीके से करनी है कि you remain a going concern. And if your public health system is you know, robust, and we can actually then survive, we will be able to do the rest. Right now, what I see as far as the public health is concerned, I don't see what is going on. I mean, I see 10 different organizations. I don't know who does what, who's supposed to do what. I have no clue. And talking about public health, I think Hassan pointed this out. This is going to be a major area for even private sector investment to come in, and we must focus on a lot of investment being promoted, facilitated, etc. in public health. Talking about austerity and how we can't experiment with that, and yet we would need to, raise taxes. Tax rates will go up. Fiscal deficits are going to be very high. The government really needs to, and I pointed this out earlier, we need to be very sure about who will be taxed more, who will be taxed less, which industries become our backbone, where do we make our money, which industries will employ people. Forget about export for now, for heaven's sake. I mean, my background, my family business is textiles. I've been hearing this for the longest time. Whilst the world is dying of COVID, here this government is talking about expanding and promoting export. And I'm thinking my orders have been cancelled when they have been on the ship. They've been cancelled. So I'm fighting arbitration, suits, and God knows what is going on here. The other industry, which no one is talking about and no one is looking at closely, is insurance. Big, huge impact here. Everything is going to be hit. We really need to rethink it. Why are investors coming out of industries like airlines? They're coming out of industries like retail. People are backing out because all of these are going to be severely hit and the insurance premiums are going to be very high. We really need to rethink all of this, and the government has to, take a reality check as to what it is doing. Very quickly, just one word on SEZs, because I spent a lot of the last few years of my life giving it a lot. And Hassan pointed out regulation and deregulation and how this really works. This is all, one has to rethink this. I won't waste a lot of time on this forum, but even the SEZs need to be rethought. Agriculture sector, I think that has a huge potential. I think that we haven't done enough in it. I think agro processing will be a big area where young people can also move towards. It has to be encouraged. I think the real estate sector has to be rethought of. Commercial real estate is no longer going to be as valuable as it used to be. This is going to affect the residential real estate. One needs to sit down and think what is going to happen and what is not. So this needs to be addressed as well. My bottom line is that when we think about going forward, we have to think about Pakistan as being, a sort of an independent kind of creature here. We need to think about what works for us internally, what industries do we promote, who do we tax, who we don't, and legacy has to go. Legacy has to go out of the window. So if the SEZ Act was passed in 2010 and it had certain sort of caveats to it, let's readdress what is going on. I'm not even sure if it's actually feasible anymore. So time for government to really sit down and think. First of all, first priority, keep people alive and keep people viable as citizens of the world. If your public health is where it is today, we will not remain viable. No one will meet us. No one will talk to us. We can't get onto airplanes. That's not what we want. And secondly, let's promote the industry which works for us. That's my bottom line.
Very good takeaway points. Hassan, I will come back to you because what Naheed has shared is very relevant to what you were talking about in terms of public-private partnerships and reforms, soft reforms. So I want a takeaway from you from this conversation. So please, if you can add to what Naheed said.
So I'll just make a very short comment because I also kind of covered this in my earlier comment. And I think the people on this panel have all worked with government in senior positions. So the suggestions they are giving are very relevant. My only comment is that COVID-19 is an unprecedented crisis. And to manage that, we need to come up with an unprecedented policy response. Doing a bit more of what we have been doing already, which means that an incremental policy response is not going to work. So without changing fundamentally how the government works, we are not going to end up at a viable solution. And I think the government would need to fundamentally rethink itself. I do see some positives coming out of it. So for example, when you look at the government's effort to open up IPP negotiations because of these pressures, I think that is something good that has come out of it. But I think the discussion needs to go far beyond such things. And I think I can go on and on, but I think I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Bilal, also I would like you to add to it, and in terms of that how policy response can rely on the perceptions of the people and the behaviors of the people, because your organization has done a lot to gauge that. So, policy response in the light of the actual experiences of the people. In this regard, if you would like to add something.
Sure. I think one of the additions to the conversation can be that we're looking at both economic policy measures, but we also need to look at the broader political economy question here. So when we talk about investments in Pakistan, we talk about local investments, but we also talk about international investments in Pakistan, because as any third world country, we are a resource strapped country, and for unleashing the potential, there has to be foreign investment. So one of my points would be to as the political landscape in the world reshapes itself. I think there is no doubt that the power shift from the west to the east, the China and the US rivalry, the greater sort of political alignment with America, India, and China, Pakistan, Russia, realignment. I think in the previous decades, one of the mistakes that Pakistan has done is not to do the realignment in a correct way. So as we talk about more micro level issues, we need to also think about the macro political economy of this issue. I think it is also quite crucial to look at the power distribution within the country. So as we talk about policy reforms, we need to also think about the fact that in the crisis times, we don't trample over the long-earned, hard-earned political consensus that we have developed, because reforms are only good as to the extent of the implementation that happens through them. So, and without institutions, the implementation is going to be very stopgap. That's a 70-year lesson in Pakistan, that policies have been fairly robust, but the implementation has lagged. We've had bursts of growth and then tumbling down. And that's partly because of the institutional crisis. So as we look at all of the policy responses, we need to also look at the civil military relations does not get unduly lopsided in one direction, which is already lopsided, but we don't want to further lopsided the federal versus the provincial power debate. And in order for us as a post-COVID response, the federal versus provincial debate has to be settled in a more meaningful form. The local versus the provincial debate. So the COVID response has to be at the local government level as well. And then the third, it is to some extent regulatory reform, but it is also a larger question of what is the role of the state in Pakistan. One of the largest challenges in terms of regulatory reform is to let the businesses, let the communities, let individuals be able to prosper on their own, with the government being a helping hand. If we were to do what we have done before in a more pronounced way, that's not going to help. As Hassan was saying, this is a very unprecedented crisis, and one of the fixes that we really need to do is to let the state get out of many businesses, many legal structures, and let the society's potential unleash itself. Without doing that, we would be regurgitating this is, I mean, as you were saying, what can public opinion inform us? I think all of these three are what the public opinion also informs us. They want to be participating in the growth. They want a share, not just in the economic gain out of it, but they also want to be contributing to the structure. They want a more lawful Pakistan in which things are not just handled by the federation, but the provinces and the local governments are also allowed to prosper and function. And the regional disparities that we have, and Pakistan has trailed behind in the 70 years, not just because of our policy failures, not just because of our economic failures, but we have also failed because of our lack of power distribution in a consensual manner, in which we left out many segments of the society, many segments of the geography. So I mean, I think a lot of meaningful discussion happened, but we need to also think about the political economy context of it, because without doing that, we wouldn't be able to have a sustainable solution to the post-COVID world.
Thank you. With this, Hassan Daud Sab, I would like you to also comment on what potential policy responses the government and the private sector and civil society at large can put together uh, against this COVID-19 outbreak.
You know, having lived in China for half of my professional life, wherever I teach and wherever I work, people ask me, how can we be like China and get the same sort of economic growth that China has? And my answer to all of them is that, are we willing to sacrifice the way that China did? You know, like one child policy. Look at them, look at their response during COVID. So are we willing to, and this is somewhat relevant to what Dr. Nadeem said in terms of our behavior, at a society level. So unless we are not willing to sacrifice, I do not see much change coming. This is the best time to deregulate. This is the best time to look at new innovative ideas in terms of digital Pakistan. But whether that would happen would largely depend on how we behave. So far, I would leave the response to all of you, whether we have demonstrated ourselves as a more disciplined country. Unless we discipline ourselves at all levels, and that means at how do we deal with business, how we deal with relationship, how do we deal with the promises that we make. We promise so much in terms of when we are attracting investment, and then when it comes, when we have the bird caged, we take most of those incentives away. So I think we need to improve our discipline at government level. And I said earlier, I think our governance structure need to be taken. We have been speaking about SCZs since 2016. I've been debating, arguing about how fast we should. Naheed has been, and even Dr. Nadeem Saab, we've all been running like chickens with head cut off. But I think we're still where we are, where perhaps we were on day one. So I think my 3 points, just to sum up, is discipline, empathy, and perhaps benevolence. And I think we need more benevolent leadership, leadership with larger vision, much beyond than, and at all level, at provincial level, as well as with more pragmatic approach, and with an approach to solve problems, not to create problems. That's it.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you. It has been a wonderful conversation, and we have discussed at length that what are the challenges we are facing, and we have come to a conclusion that yes, we are facing an unprecedented challenge in the shape of COVID-19 outbreak that has resulted in low business confidence, that has resulted in a hit when it comes to the remittances Pakistan has been recipient of, when it has come to the growth rate across different sectors, whether it's the large-scale manufacturing industries or small and medium enterprises. So the economic challenge is there, but we have also discussed that there are opportunities in the current economic landscape that originate from Pakistan's strategic importance geographically, and Pakistan's the shape of Pakistan's economy, which is far more dependent upon domestic factors, which is why the global impact is limited at multiple levels. And we can look into responses which are essentially inclusive and which thrive upon the political gains or the economic gains we have made in the past, and which can further reevaluate the policies in place, which might be not so effective and efficient because the scenarios and the factors have changed due to this COVID. And we've talked about the importance of letting go the austerity measures and state coming up with a fiscal response, but we have also talked at how this fiscal response is limited because the state's capacity is limited. So I think at large are of the view that yes, the challenge is big, but the response can be equally big, and we can survive and we can sail through the age of COVID. And although the World Health Organization is saying that COVID is here to stay, but then again, we have to live with it. So thank you once again to all of you for being part of this wonderful conversation. We will be putting together a policy brief in the light of the discussion held, and we will be sharing with you, with the government and all of the major stakeholders. So once again, thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.